They told you Sunday school was about salvation, about innocence, about guiding children toward the light. But in Cedar Creek, Indiana, the winter of 1878 ripped that illusion apart like the tearing of an old hymn book. 50 children, gone. Not in a single night, not in a dramatic raid. But taken in silence, over 2 years, one name at a time, erased so cleanly that even their own families forgot they'd ever existed. Imagine this. You find a ledger. Faded ink. Names you recognize, but no faces in memory. And beneath the church's polished floorboards, a space. A hidden chamber so dark, so foul with the smell of earth and something far worse, that even the sheriff refused to enter without a Bible in hand. What was discovered inside should have shattered the Methodist community forever. Instead, it was buried, locked away in archives no one dared open, because the real crime wasn't just what happened to those children. It was who made it possible, and why it could never be allowed to reach the light. Cedar Creek in the late 1870s looked like a painting of American virtue. Limestone church towers piercing the winter sky, coal smoke curling above tidy rows of clapboard houses, and the sound of hymns drifting through frosted windows. But under that facade, the soil was already rotten. This was a town built on two forces, the hunger for God and the hunger for power. The Methodist Church sat at the center of both. Its Sunday school, led by Margaret Wilson, had become a beacon across the Midwest. Families from miles away would brave icy wagon rides just to have their children sit in those oak pews and recite scripture under her unblinking gaze. Margaret wasn't just a teacher, she was a tactician. She knew how to speak to a mother's hope, how to touch a father's pride. She could take a child who could barely read and turn them into the image of piety within weeks. But behind those lessons was something else, a system. Parents thought they were giving their children a gift. In reality, they were feeding them into an invisible machine. And the machine was hungry. Because what Cedar Creek's leaders wanted wasn't just obedient children. They wanted assets. The first opportunity came in September 1876. An 8-year-old boy named Timothy Morrison, quiet, bright, the kind of child who memorized scripture like other boys collected marbles. His parents were recent German immigrants, grateful for anything the church offered. Margaret Wilson told them Timothy had been selected. A Methodist family in Kentucky, experts in biblical archaeology, needed a gifted child to assist in their studies. He would receive advanced education, perhaps even train as a missionary. It was a story tailored perfectly to his parents' dreams. They packed his small case. They prayed over him. They watched him leave with tears of joy, not knowing they'd never see him again. Weeks later, 10-year-old Mary Catherine Phillips was sent on a missionary trip to Illinois. A widowed mother was told her daughter's leadership and faith could help spread the word to frontier families. She signed the permission slip with shaking hands, proud her child had been chosen by God. By Christmas, 6 more were gone. No one called them missing. No one dared. The parents were shown forged letters in careful handwriting. "I'm learning so much, I'm so happy here," and told their children were too busy studying to come home. The truth, they were already sold. This was never random. Margaret Wilson and her quiet shadow, Sarah Coleman, had built a method as precise as any industrial process. They didn't just look for the brightest children. In fact, intelligence could be dangerous. They looked for compliance, for silence, for the kind of child who would obey an order even when every instinct screamed against it. They targeted the isolated, immigrant families with broken English, widows with too many mouths to feed, newcomers without friends to notice when a child was gone. Poverty was a gift to them. Desperation was leverage. Sarah was the true listener. She would kneel beside a child during crafts, her voice soft, her eyes warm, coaxing secrets out of them. "What's your home like? Does your mother cry at night? Do you feel different from other children?" The answers weren't for comfort. They were for classification. Strong boys went to factories and mines. Pretty girls went to households, at least the ones that looked like households from the outside. Others, the ones with the wrong kind of beauty or the right kind of obedience, disappeared into markets no church bulletin would ever mention. Every hymn sung on Sunday was another mask over the machinery, and the machinery never stopped. By the winter of 1876, the operation had outgrown Cedar Creek. Margaret's excursions became part of a larger web. Methodist churches in Indiana, Ohio, and Illinois quietly feeding children into the same unseen pipeline. The expansion was perfectly timed. The railroads were exploding across the Midwest, and with them came new possibilities for moving human cargo. Robert Hayes, coal magnate, grain merchant, church benefactor, was the linchpin. His shipping contracts gave him contacts in every station house and yard, men who could make sure certain names never appeared on passenger lists and certain crates were never inspected. On paper, the children were traveling to educational retreats, religious conferences, archaeological sites. In truth, they were vanishing between stops, one day in Indiana, the next in a St. Louis warehouse or a Chicago boarding house that would change its name the following week. Parents didn't question it because the letters kept coming, letters in Sarah Coleman's perfect penmanship, dictated by their sons and daughters. Every word crafted to keep hope alive, to keep doubt at bay. The truth was simpler and far darker. Once a child boarded the train, Cedar Creek had no intention of bringing them back. Before the train ever arrived, the children were made ready. Sarah Coleman's journal, found decades later in a trunk under false floorboards, read like a manual for breaking a mind. The conditioning began weeks, sometimes months, before a child was selected. It was done in whispers, in carefully chosen Bible verses, in private talks framed as spiritual guidance. She planted the idea that their true calling lay beyond their family, that their parents loved them but could never fully understand the special path God had prepared. Small separations came first. An afternoon in the church kitchen instead of going home for lunch. A night spent preparing lessons with Margaret. Then entire weekends at the parsonage, where no one could overhear the subtle rewiring of loyalty. Sarah's genius was in twisting virtue into shackles. She praised obedience as holiness. She reframed isolation as divine purpose. She told them that to serve God, they must shed the attachments of their old life. By the time the child stepped onto the platform, they no longer saw it as leaving. They saw it as ascending. And for the ones who resisted, there were darker methods, ones Sarah described with clinical detachment, as if she were cataloguing pests rather than destroying human whim. Lol. Anna Kowalski was 12 when they chose her. Her parents, Polish immigrants who scraped by on her father's mill wages, believed they had been blessed when the church recognized her spiritual gifts. Margaret told them Anna's calling was too great for Cedar Creek. She would join a missionary training program that could one day make her the pride of their family, their church, their people. Sarah's journal tells the real story. It began with gentle alienation. "You're not like the other children, Anna. God has chosen you for something higher." She was praised for her quiet nature, for her willingness to listen. Then came the poison. Subtle doubts about her family. They don't see your light yet. Sometimes, love can't understand destiny. Within weeks, Anna was confiding everything to Sarah. Her father's temper, her mother's sadness, her own longing to be someone important. Sarah positioned herself as the only person who truly understood. By the time Anna's parents kissed her goodbye, she had already been convinced her family's poverty and foreign tongue made them unfit to guide her. She believed leaving them was an act of service to God. She wasn't running away. She was being delivered, gift-wrapped, to people who would never let her see the sun again. The silence might have lasted forever if not for Ellen Hartwell. She wasn't a parent. She was a seamstress who mended the choir robes and Sunday school uniforms, the kind of woman people didn't notice, which made her perfect for noticing everything. Ellen began keeping her own list. Names of children she'd fitted for choir sashes or hemmed dresses for, children she never saw again. At first, she assumed families had moved away for work, but the excuses didn't match. She knew the sound of a lie, and Cedar Creek was full of them. One winter afternoon, Ellen overheard a conversation between two mothers in the market. One mentioned a letter from her son in missionary school, but read it aloud with hesitation as if the handwriting didn't feel familiar. The other mother went pale, saying she'd received almost the exact same letter from her daughter, word for word. That night, Ellen wrote down both names. Then she added every child she could remember vanishing in the past 2 years. The list grew to 37 before she realized the same woman's name appeared every time. Margaret Wilson. Ellen didn't know what she was going to do with this knowledge. She only knew one thing. The church was not going to save those children. Ellen Hartwell started with the church's attendance ledgers. She knew the janitor, a man too old to care about gossip, and convinced him to let her straighten up the Sunday school records one evening. What she found made her blood run cold. The names were there: Timothy Morrison, Mary Catherine Phillips, Anna Kowalski, written neatly, week after week, long after they were supposedly gone. Margaret's handwriting, steady as stone, had kept them present on paper. Ellen understood the danger instantly. This wasn't incompetence, it was camouflage. No outsider could accuse the church of losing children if the records showed they never left. Her next move was reckless. Late one night, lantern in hand, she crept into the church basement. The air was damp, heavy. A new section of wall didn't match the old stonework. She tapped it with the handle of her shears. Hollow. Behind it was a crawl space, and in that space, beneath layers of rotting fabric, she saw what no human should ever have to see. Rows of small shoes, dozens of them, each pair neatly placed, as if waiting for their owner to come back. Ellen staggered out into the snow, and for the first time she realized she might not live long enough to tell anyone what she'd found. Ellen tried the sheriff first. He listened without interrupting, then closed his office door and leaned in close. "You need to let this go," he whispered. "There are things in this town bigger than both of us." It wasn't just fear in his voice. It was complicity, the kind that comes from years of taking favors, of knowing which doors not to open. When she went to the pastor, his reaction was worse. He quoted scripture about bearing false witness and warned her that slander against a woman as respected as Margaret Wilson could destroy her soul. By the time she left his study, Ellen realized she wasn't facing ignorance. She was facing a wall. Cedar Creek's most powerful families had children in Margaret's program. Some had lost children, and yet they stayed silent. Because to speak meant admitting they'd given their trust, and their sons and daughters, to something monstrous. The truth wasn't just being hidden, it was being protected. That night, Ellen began writing down everything she knew, dates, names, overheard conversations. She sealed the pages in an oilskin pouch and hid it in the chimney of her small home. She wasn't sure who might need it someday. She only knew she might not be the one to deliver it. By the spring of 1881, Cedar Creek was no longer just a small-town church with an unsettling secret. It was a spoke in a wheel turning across the Midwest. Letters arrived in heavy, cream-colored envelopes, sealed with wax. They weren't sent through the local post. They came by train courier, addressed only to Margaret Wilson, in a hand too elegant for farm country. Sarah's journal reveals the next layer: the visitors. Well-dressed men and women who spoke with accents from Chicago, St. Louis, even New York. They would arrive without fanfare, spend a night or two in the parsonage's locked guest room, and leave before sunrise with someone who had known what been there before. The disappearances became more selective. Margaret no longer took just the obedient or the lonely. She wanted the talented, the beautiful, the gifted. Children with unusual voices, quick minds, or rare physical traits. Sarah overheard one visitor call Cedar Creek a reliable supplier. Supplier of what? She never dared to ask. When the last of the Kowalski boys vanished, taken after choir practice, his coat still on the peg, the town didn't even post notices anymore. Families whispered, cried behind closed doors, and moved away quietly. Cedar Creek had learned a dangerous truth. The more you feed the darkness, the less it needs to hide. It happened on a night when the wind rattled every loose shutter in Cedar Creek. Ellen was mending a dress when a sharp knock came at her door. Sheriff Calloway stood there, hat dripping with rain. "Routine check," he said, though no such thing existed. His eyes moved over her small home like a man counting exits. He asked about her work, about the church, about whether she'd been feeling safe. Then he asked, casually, too casually, if she'd been keeping any notes. Her stomach turned to ice. The pouch in the chimney felt suddenly enormous, like a living thing that might start calling out to him. She lied, smoothly as she could, and offered him tea to buy time. While his back was turned, she slipped the pouch from the chimney and pushed it under the loose floorboard beneath her sewing table. When he left, she didn't breathe for nearly a minute. Only when the sound of his boots vanished into the rain did she move. That night, Ellen wrapped the pouch in plain muslin, walked 3 miles to the outskirts of town, and buried it beneath the roots of a lightning-struck oak. She knew then, if the truth was ever going to be told, it would not be by her lips, but by someone who dug in the right place. Sarah waited until the parsonage was quiet, the visitors gone, the lamps dimmed, Margaret in her study. She stepped inside without knocking. Margaret didn't look up from her writing. "You've been restless lately," she said, her tone neither warm nor cold, just knowing. Sarah's voice shook. "Where do they go, Margaret?" The scratching of the pen stopped. "They go where they are wanted," Margaret replied, as if discussing a shipment of grain. "You mean sold," Sarah snapped. "You're selling them." Margaret set down her pen and finally met Sarah's eyes. "You think small, child. Money is nothing. These children are investments, in hands that can shape them, train them, make use of them in ways their parents could never imagine." Sarah's throat tightened. "And the ones who don't cooperate?" Margaret smiled faintly, a terrible, patient smile. "Not every seed takes root." The air in the room felt heavy, oppressive. Sarah realized then that Margaret wasn't working for these visitors. She was part of them, a link in a chain that stretched far beyond Cedar Creek. Margaret leaned back in her chair. "You've seen too much to be one of the children, but you could still be useful." And in that moment, Sarah understood. If she stayed, she wouldn't just witness the darkness, she'd become part of it. Sarah waited for the next storm. In Cedar Creek, storms were cover. They blurred the sound of footsteps, swallowed the sight of lanterns in the dark. She packed nothing that could be traced. No letters, no keepsakes, no clothing given to her by Margaret. Just a loaf of bread, a small knife, and the scrap of train schedule she'd stolen from the depot wall. But leaving Cedar Creek wasn't as simple as walking away. The visitors had eyes, station masters, carriage drivers, even farmhands who owed favors. Sarah knew if she was spotted alone, word would reach Margaret before she even made the first bend in the road. She waited until the church bells tolled midnight, then slipped out the back door of the parsonage. Every shadow felt alive. Every rustle of branches felt like a hand reaching for her. 1/2 mile from the train tracks, she saw it. A lantern, swinging in the distance, Someone was waiting. For one heart-stopping moment, she thought it might be Ellen, but as the figure stepped forward, the beam of light caught a sheriff's badge. "Going somewhere?" he asked, voice smooth, almost amused. Sarah gripped the knife in her pocket. If she couldn't outrun Cedar Creek, she might have to fight her way out. The sheriff stepped closer, rain dripping from the brim of his hat. "You've been asking questions that don't belong to you," he said softly, as if afraid the trees might overhear. "Margaret doesn't like loose ends." Sarah's pulse thundered in her ears. She backed away slowly, keeping her hand on the knife. The mud sucked at her shoes, the storm masking the sound of her breath. "I'm not going back," she said. He smiled, a thin, humorless line. "Everyone goes back, one way or another." Then he lunged. The struggle was short, brutal. The blade found his side, but not deep enough. He caught her wrist, twisting until pain shot up her arm and shoved her into the muck. Sarah kicked, scrambled, broke free, and ran. The sheriff cursed behind her, but the storm was on her side now, turning the path to slurry. She didn't stop until she reached the crossing. A train's headlamp burned through the sheets of rain. Without thinking, she leapt onto the lowest step of a passing freight car, fingers clawing at the cold metal. She didn't look back. If she had, she might have seen the sheriff standing at the tracks, bleeding but smiling, as though he knew exactly where she was headed. Decades passed. Cedar Creek grew, modernized, and the horrors of its past were whispered only in hidden corners, but the truth never fully vanished. In 1923, a group of workers renovating an old farmhouse on the outskirts of town unearthed a lightning-struck oak. Beneath its roots, they found a small, oilskin-wrapped bundle. Carefully unrolled, it revealed pages yellowed with age. Ellen Hartwell's journal. Every name, every date, every detail of the disappearances, the letters, the shipments, the conditioning, the lies. It was proof of the systematic theft of 50 children, proof of a network that had stretched across state lines, proof that Cedar Creek had been a nexus of corruption disguised in piety. The community recoiled. Newspapers barely touched it. The powerful had buried most evidence. The survivors, if any, were lost to time. But the journal remained, a silent monument to the innocence stolen and the darkness protected. Today, if you look at Cedar Creek, you see a quiet town. You see Sunday schools, stained glass, and bell towers. But if you dig beneath the surface, you find the roots of a machine built on faith, fear, and power. Remember this story. Remember the names. Because sometimes the children who never came home are the ones whose voices scream the loudest. If you dare to listen,